welcome to Conversations on Social Work Careers. I'm Jennifer Luna, and I'm your host of the show. And I'm also a writer for the New Social Worker magazine. I write the column, Your Social Work Career Coach. And today I'm really excited to have a guest with us today, Brian Rosenbaum. And he's going to help me to pronounce his last name right again, because I want to make sure we get it right. But Brian has had several different positions. A macro social worker. He has a really great educational background from UCLA and Columbia. And he's going to tell us about his journey as a macro social worker and advocate and many other things that he does. So welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you for coming today. I want to just first start off by maybe asking you the question, tell me about yourself. Just give us the brief elevator pitch and give us an overview of what you do.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for having me. The quick version is that I'm a social worker who thought I wanted to go clinical and realized during grad school that I can do therapy, I'm fine at it, but what I really love and what I really excel at is sort of both creating the systems and the relationships for bigger impact. And for me, that was programming and planning. But it also had to be community facing because I'm an extrovert by nature. And where I took my social work career initially was into volunteerism, from volunteerism to corporate volunteerism and corporate partnerships. And that led the way to fundraising. And so now I serve as the director of development for major gifts and individual giving at the LA Ronald McDonald House. But in every meeting, every CEO I've ever had is so proud when they're able to say, this is Brian, he leads our fundraising, but he's a social worker at heart. He's been on the front lines. He has those experience. He has the equity and social justice lens, and he knows what it's like out there on the front lines. And not only does it give me a ton of credibility with donors and partners, but like fundamentally, the reason why I'm here is about what social work stands for. It's about meeting people where they're at, whether that's clients or donors, but always prioritizing dignity, social justice, human rights, and the voice of those who are denied the opportunity to maximize their human potential.
I think this conversation is so timely because we're seeing so many social workers who are thinking of switching to the macro track or are already far into their career in their macro track and thinking of switching into different industries, corporate being one of them. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about our first conversation was how seamlessly you did that by incorporating the social work skills and ethics and professionalism that we all learn in school. So after you, when you started your journey as an MSW, tell us a little bit where you went from there.
Yeah, well, I'll start a little bit before that. I went to UCLA to study psychology and Spanish. I loved, I think what every high school student who has a great AP Psych teacher loves, which is, I love thinking about people and how they think and why they behave the way they do, but also the way they behave in relation to society. I loved social psych and behavioral psych and thinking about, those biases, the effects, right? The bystander effect, and all the things we learn in sort of like Psych 101. I also knew that being raised in Southern California, if I wanted to go into into service of others, an amazing way that I could do that and leverage my Spanish fluency was by working with Latino populations. So my first job out of my undergrad, actually even before I graduated, I started in April working 10 hours a week for a group called Padres contra el Cáncer, Parents Against Cancer, based here in LA out of Children's Hospital LA, and I was running the education program. And this was for Latino children with cancer and their families during this incredibly difficult period in their lives. After that, I went into pediatric palliative care for a little bit, so quality of life at the end of life. And that's why I went for my master's program thing. I actually wanted to do hospital, medical social work. This was, before Obamacare, the healthcare system was even more broken. But again, as I mentioned, there is where I really learned that programming and planning and evaluation and community mobilizing is where my strengths lie. And I learned that through involvement in student groups. So for folks out there who are pre-master's program, I mean, any program is what you make of it. I was in college access after that. And, it doesn't really matter where you go to college as long as you make the most of it. To some extent, the same is true for grad programs. So I would give people the advice of get involved with those student groups, whether they're caucuses or student interest groups or whatever, because that's where we learn the soft leadership skills and volunteer management skills, that are going to reinforce your clinical skills. And give you another lens on how we work in nonprofit settings, because nonprofits are complicated little entities or giant big entities like the United Way, where I was before this. So I took all of those skill sets and wrapped them up and came back to LA from New York and got into volunteer management. And I really saw volunteer management as just another lens of social work, because we're building relationships with those volunteers who, by the way, are donors. We're building their capacity, just like we do in clinical lens. We're not often solving their problems, but sometimes, we're giving them good advice. We're building really strong systems so that they can actually do their work seamlessly, so that they don't have questions. And so we're doing empowerment. And although I don't love the word empower, because I don't believe that we can transfer power from one person to another, I do believe that we can equip people for success, and then we can activate them to meet their own goals, and in that same way help us meet our goals. So they become these win-win, not just relationships, but partnerships. And I loved that about the clinical lens too, that it is a partnership when you really get into the flow with your clients.
I have a question for you. How were you able to stay so close to your social work education throughout those experiences? Because those aren't necessarily social work employers. And I think sometimes those of us that are macro, we start leaning into the other industry's language, right? And that is one of the things that I'm so impressed with you, is just always falling back on that social work education. So do you have any tips, or how are you able to do that?
I love that idea of language. I mean, it's such a muscle. And I really think that I was able, when I came back to LA and got that first job coming back, I wasn't just doing volunteerism. I was also working with the alumni network of those first generation college students. And so I was still in it. I still had that community, that client facing lens. But I was also wearing other hats like marketing communications. And I was sort of, the on-site tech guy when something needed fixing. But having all of those, wearing all of those capes, I would say, all those hats, especially the program-y kind of side, but also the communication side. Like, we as social workers can bring a different lens to communications and to the collateral, the sales collateral, or whatever it is, the fundraising collateral, whatever, or even to the board. So I think none of us is wearing just one hat. And as we put on and take off those different hats, it's the same head that needs to stay underneath. And so we can continue to bring that language and reinforce it. I also, outside of working hours, got involved with a group called Aware LA here in Los Angeles, which stands for Alliance of White Anti-Racists Everywhere. So it's white anti-racist organizing. So it was bringing together white people to talk about racism, to talk about undoing our racism. And so, I was doing the nonprofit thing, and I was doing the communication and the community engagement and the volunteer and the alumni pieces. But at the same time, I was feeding that work that to me was so important, which is continuing to build my social justice muscle and grow with the times. This was 2011. And that muscle that I think I built, in the years after undergrad and through those first years, continuing to organize and work with Aware LA helped me. It's a muscle. And when you keep working, you strengthen.
It sounds like you were very intentional too about the opportunities that you sought out.
Yeah, tried to be. And that included future jobs. So the volunteerism muscle after sort of I hit the right point, the right stride at College Summit, which was the name of that old organization. They're now called Peer Forward. They're based out of DC. They do really cool work. So I would encourage folks to look them up if you're looking about college access and volunteerism, because they still have a great program. I went to work at Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, managing groups of volunteers all around the country who build the community to raise the funds to fund the research to find the cure to pancreatic cancer, which is the most deadly of the sort of recalcitrant cancers, and the one that killed my grandfather. So it was close to me personally, and I got to, again, like build community, build relationships, build partnerships, equip people, build their capacity, while still leaning into that left brain that might be my dominant for me, which is about building strong systems and collateral and processes, so that when someone says, I want to make a difference, I want to help, say, cool, here's some steps how to do it. Just handing you a piece of paper might not be the best way for you to learn. So let me walk you through it. And in that way, I'm going to manage you. I'm going to build your capacity. I'm going to set expectations. I'm going to build trust. And then we're going to work together, and we're going to lock arms, and go shoulder to shoulder into this work together.
That reminds me of something that I read yesterday about, how times have changed so much from, training people with these big binders and presentations and data. And now it's more walking alongside them or coaching alongside them. And because there's just, everything changed with technology, and you can find information on how to do something anywhere, but to have someone really walk alongside you makes such a big difference.
I'm just leaving a job, or I just recently left a job where I had a team of 4 that I supervised, and they were all incredibly wonderful, creative people. But if I handed them an SOP, they would look at it like it was written in Greek, a standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot over the last 3 years in that role about learning styles and about adult learning theory, which essentially is that you just can't give people a book and expect them to read it and do it. Interpersonal learners need you to meet them where they're at, recognize that phrase? Like that's what social work is all about.
Yeah. And you're right. That's not what we do with our clients. We don't just hand them an SOP and say, go do it yourself. We help them.
Good luck.
Right. So tell me a little bit about how you incorporated your volunteerism and social work background into the corporate world.
Yeah, you bet. After Pancreatic Cancer Action Network, I joined the United Way of Greater Los Angeles at a time where they were, as their engagement manager, so I led all of the signature volunteer activities, but I also led custom corporate volunteerism, because your Wells Fargo and your UPS and your Deloitte are knocking every day at the door of United Way, because United Way is the hub. That's the value proposition that United Ways all claim to be. They're your philanthropic concierge. You give them your dollars, and they're going to put it out in a way that's targeted and strategic, that's going to make the most impact based on their priorities and pillars. And at United Way of Greater LA, there was a moment in 2017 where they were looking at their numbers and seeing that workplace giving, which is the model for all United Ways, right? The companies tell their employees, give a portion of your paycheck, and it goes straight through payroll, and you don't have to worry about it. But that model was not generating as much revenue as before. And if you think about, 5 or 10 years ago, people are wanting to touch the work a little bit more. They're wanting to feel the work. They're wanting to own the work. It's not enough just to give $1 out of your paycheck like our grandparents did, right? Like my grandfather was a Red Cross donor, and you could not convince him otherwise. But he gave out of tradition. He gave out of allegiance and a sense of commitment. That's not how millennials act, and it's certainly not how Gen Z acts, as we are in the moment of the greatest wealth transfer in the history of mankind, right? As baby boomers start moving on and younger folks start inheriting their wealth. And so United Way of Greater LA, and really all United Ways between 5 and 10 years ago, realized we need to start engaging donors in a different way. And so they hired me not only to do their general volunteerism, like the Run Walk and Read Across America and, the food collections in June, stamp out hunger, but also to think about how we can engage corporate employees in a way that keeps them in and brings them deeper into the house. And so as a social worker, I was really well positioned to do this. And I worked across the organization with a program team to develop what we called equity activities. And the idea was, how can we, in about 30 minutes, engage volunteers in a way that's really not only helping them learn about the work and do the action, but also own their own relationship to the work. And so we built out, you've seen these sort of poverty simulations. It's a terrible phrase, but they exist. I think they're spent out of one of the United Ways in Canada or something. But we developed our own, where we built this game board and we had people managing sort of a simulation budget with real pennies on this game board. And they ran into challenges along the way and then had to reallocate their pennies when they lost, income. Yeah. And then sort of to spoil, to bury the lead, there were United Way cards that then showed United Way's impact. But across all of this, as a social worker, I have this script about how can we ask questions of participants and engage them in what it felt like to lose some income. When your kid, falls out of the tree and needs to get a cast, or when you get a fender bender and you lose your car, when you have to take days off work for childcare. And it was really helping people tap into, oh, wow, people living in poverty, which is United Way's core mission. Holy cow. And now I'm feeling a little bit of this and building that empathy. And I was at AT&T in El Segundo doing this, and I'm walking around and there's about 50 or 60 people in the room, and they're in pairs or trios doing the work. And I walk by a group and one of the guys says, I've done this before. And his partner said to him, oh, you've done this exercise? And the guy was like, no, I lived this. When my mom got cancer, we had to sell the car so that we keep putting meals on the table.
Yeah.
And it was in that moment that the guy was like, oh, poverty isn't something that just happens on the news. Poverty is real. We've experienced it. You experienced it. And in that moment, he flexed that empathy muscle and grew it. And after we did this with 800 people over the course of FY18, we saw giving gift size increase by 28%. Wow. We saw retention increase by 21%. And then we saw undesignated giving, which is really important for United Ways, increase by 14%.
Oh my gosh.
And it was this incredible moment where yes, when people can own this work and you just do this little tweak, the small test of change in terms of bringing a social work equity lens, people get it. And they understand the value that someone like a big United Way can have when you're talking about education or hunger or economic mobility or whatever it is that they focus on.
How would you, for somebody wanting to get into this work, give us an example of how you would introduce yourself to somebody in the corporate world that maybe hasn't had many interactions with social workers before?
Well, I'm not sure I would frame it as social work, to be quite honest. I think it's a word that people don't really understand. And so there's a softer way to go about it. But if I'm doing volunteerism and, Wells Fargo is knocking at the door and I have something like this, I have an experience or an activity, or I could bring in a lived experience speaker, in a way that's compensated and done with a lot of dignity. If there's a way that we can do this empathy building and this mission connection with them, they love this. Because corporate partners, I have learned, are interested in about three things. They want employee engagement, they're looking for brand lift, and they're looking for business development. Now, we can always help them get new clients. So number three is sometimes a loss. But brand lift is great. We can always bring a photographer. Yeah. If you can find a videographer to get a video of corporate employees volunteering with interviews with, the head honcho in the space, and then one of you, and then interviews with volunteers. They love that. I did one with Jet Propulsion Laboratory, NASA out in Pasadena. Yeah. They put it on LinkedIn, which, not known for its videos. And within a week, it had 14,000 views.
Oh my gosh.
Volunteering at the Boys and Girls Club. So I think meeting that need. But then this employee engagement need is actually the most important. because we know that whether you're at a corporate group or a faith group or a civic group like a Rotary, institutions out there are desperate right now to keep congregants in the pews and members coming to events and employees happy and satisfied. Like, that's why they all have all those cookies and candy in the, in the break rooms. But they also know that building relationships internally and building rapport and connectivity and team morale, it's so important. And every company wants to give back to their community, or at least has some kind of mechanism to do it if they're large enough. It might be CSR. So it might be corporate social responsibility, or it just might be, that design firm, the person who just feels a connection, whether it's rooted in their faith or rooted in their past experience or rooted in their relationships. They'll do a day during the year where they go out and volunteer, or they have some kind of a, VT, a volunteer time off program. And we can facilitate that. So I think as nonprofits, we don't often talk about what we can do for our partners. We're always thinking about what they can do for us. But I think if you go into that conversation knowing that you add value, and start being able to speak the language and make it businessy, right? If I'm working with a corporate group and they ask me to volunteer, I'm going to say, great, do you have any budget for this opportunity? It takes time and resources to coordinate an event like this, and your budget will help offset planning and materials and coordination costs. And I'm using businessy words, right? Offsetting costs, right? It's an event. It's not just some like soft, fuzzy little thing. And if they say no, I'll say, well, can you at least handle the raw materials, the product, so that we can break even? And they're like, oh, there's a bell that goes off. Oh, you're not going to break even unless we contribute something? Okay, well, yeah, I think I can find 1,000 over in marketing, but I can do that.
So you're really reframing it so that you're doing something for them, and approaching it like you're doing something for them. And I'm sure that for people who are just starting this type of work, if they take that approach, they'll feel more confident going in.
Confident and competent and prepared. Absolutely. These are partnerships. Partnerships only work when they're win-win. Otherwise, what is it? I don't think it makes sense for anyone.
So then after United Way, I know that you had some leadership roles that you began working in administration. So tell us about that path as a leader in volunteerism.
Yeah. After my time at United Way, really understanding CSR and getting to interface with some corporate partners, I joined Imagine LA, which is where I was at most recently, working with families emerging from homelessness. We had a wraparound program that helped them stay housed and essentially, build pathways out of poverty. And in this role, I was overseeing fundraising, communications, volunteerism, sort of community partnerships, strategic partnerships, and then our sector leadership and advocacy work, which is really underneath marketing and communications, but it's being a leader in the family poverty and homelessness space here in Los Angeles. And as a manager, I will say, I have never used my social work skills or mindset as much as I did as a supervisor starting 3 months before the pandemic. And then getting sent home and having to manage a team of very creative, very sensitive people for until now, virtually. Meeting them where they're at, being sensitive to the challenges and the burnout in the moment. I don't think I thought about it this way at the time, but I was certainly, working around the edges of mental health, right? Of what we were all experiencing in 2020. Definitely.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that now more than ever, especially in terms of employee engagement. When I think about the roles that you've had or that you did in that position, one of the things, and now you're in fundraising, which we'll get to in just a second, but there's really no college degree in fundraising, right? And in some of the things that you've done. And so who were your competitors when you're applying for those jobs?
Well, that's interesting. I think it was probably folks with a lot more a lot more fundraising experience than me, a lot more miles on that odometer in terms of working with major donors and individual donors. But I think what stood out to me, and you can ask my boss this, was, the lens, that social work lens and the equity lens that I bring to my work, and understanding how teams, what teams need when it comes to leadership, and when it comes to, someone who can step up when their leadership is needed, but step back, to let others shine, to, build their capacity, whether that's through delegation or whether that's through committees, but also managing up, right? Working with the board and helping them be a great fundraising board, which not all boards are. And it's going shoulder to shoulder and helping them understand, hey, here's what we need. Here's some strategies. Here's a menu, right? We social workers love menus. Here are some options that I think might work for you. And it's been one of my the strongest arrows in my quiver always has been menus. An engagement menu for corporate partners, a volunteer menu for those volunteers, anything, a fund, a donor menu, a donor impact menu for
that's a great metaphor.
Major donors. It's menus do so much because people need options. But they need limited options, right? When you go to the supermarket and you see all those peanut butters, we get what's it called? Analysis paralysis. Our clients do too. Our kids do too. My 4-year-old needs options. And I'm not saying that our volunteers, our donors are 4-year-olds, but when we limit the options, we control the message, we control our impact, but we also create, it's not an illusion of choice. It's real choices that are defined within the scope of what we want to do. What are our goals? What's the impact we want to have together?
And you're right. That does allow you to take more control over the situation. How did, when we didn't really talking about this, but I'm just going to ask anyway. When you were applying for this current job, how did you demonstrate that in your interview, that you had those skills? Or was it on your resume? Was it your track record? Did they know about you?
Oh, did I? I mean, I think it's just part of my DNA at this point. And I also know that I have a lot of biases and I have a lot of blind spots, but I'm not afraid to name those. I think the most important thing we can do when we come up against uncertainty is just not be afraid to say, oh, this is a little bit of a blank page for me. I have some ideas, I have some instincts, but I also know I have some biases. Here's some thoughts. How can what's the best solution given all the things that I don't know? Right now I'm reading a book called Make to Know by Lauren Buckman. And it's a little bit of a different lens than I'm used to, but one of my mentors suggested it. And it's about, the thesis is basically that in order to arrive at discovery, in order to arrive at learning and knowledge, the only way to do it is through it. We have to get started. And the opening montage sort of anecdote is about the design of the first Apple stores. And you go into one right now and they're works of art, right? Every single detail is meticulously chosen. The experience, the genius bar, the level of knowledge of people, there are a lot of gears to that machine, but someone had to build it. And Steve Jobs had no idea what he wanted when he was talking to the designer who designed the first one, and how did they create that? And so this book really is leaning into this idea that in a moment of uncertainty, that is how we actually create where we're going. Very few sculptors know what the sculpture is going to look like, and very few novelists know what the book is going to look like. Everyone starts with a blank page, and we can sort of come in with skills and expertise and knowledge, but sometimes you just got to name a blank page or your biases that would prevent you from seeing how to get to where you want to go. And I think just naming the reality, naming feelings, those I statements that we social workers do.
Right. That's awesome.
Lifelong skills.
Yeah. I'm so impressed the way that you're able to incorporate them. So what type of advice would you have for someone that's, looking, and say a master's level social worker that's looking to either have a career in volunteerism or corporate engagement or fundraising or all three?
Yeah. I think the core of all of this, there's a couple core pillars that have just got to be strong. And number one is relationships. You can be an extrovert or you can be an introvert. You can have varying strengths and levels of trauma. But at the end of the day, what we need to do is meet people where they're at and get to know them as people, not as muscle who's going to lift up, the wood that's going to build your Habitat for Humanity house, or not as a walking ATM that's going to give a gift, or not as a board member who just is, sitting in a chair at this moment. It's real relationships. It's getting to know people for who they are and understanding their motivations, just like we do as social workers with, as clinical social workers. Looking at the whole person. Because what you see of them is only like this little fraction of the pie of who they are. And as we build those relationships, such a key is listening. And it's actually something that I'm not always very great at. Like, as you can tell, I love talking. And so shutting up every once in a while is one of the things that it's a muscle that I am always building. Another one of my mentors was talking to me about the power of ritual in jobs. And he said that in a new job, you have the opportunity to find yourself whoever you want to be. You've been in those interviews, they know you from that, but you're stepping in on day one and you get to be whoever you want to be.
That's so
you want
true.
to be, and sort of we need fewer superheroes and more Yodas.
Right.
And if you want to be that Yoda, that calm sense of Zen, amazing listener, like, cool, just do it.
That's so true.
But the ritual that's involved, he said, going up into his new office, he had 5 steps that he needed to go up to get into the building. And for each step, he had a word that he just repeated to himself every day when he walked into that space to help him deal with the past history that led him to this point, because we're all walking in with a lot of baggage, and also to set himself on the path that he wanted to get on. And that mantra, he kept it in his wallet, so he just had to pull it out. It was facing him every morning, and he saw those 3 words, and those were his intentions, for the next 8 hours of work.
Wow. That's a great, I've never thought about that before, like having a ritual. And I've been at my job for a long time, and I probably have one that I just haven't identified yet.
Yeah.
Before we're almost out of time, but I wanted to also just give you a chance to talk about the side business that you have, and your website, and what people, there's so many resources on that website. It's incredible. You're so generous with your information. So let's give a shout out about that too.
Oh, thank you. Well, if you like what you heard today, no, I love sharing my wisdom and my knowledge. I've had the honor to speak to volunteer groups like MAVA and TEVA in Minnesota and Texas, Dovia LA here in Los Angeles, Center for Nonprofit Management's 501 conference here in LA, just sharing knowledge, sharing wisdom. If I can be of service, I love to. And so talking about things like corporate and community and faith partnership building, or creating specifically volunteer partnerships. I love talking about full cost volunteering. I mentioned budgets earlier, and we can actually present a budget that covers the hard costs and the soft costs. Like, we can pay for our time, which volunteering never does. And actually, volunteering can be a lost leader, right? It can be the thing that brings a partner in, but it can lose you money as a company. So if you're at the level where you're thinking about budgets and how you can actually raise some dollars, I'll just share one of my proudest moments around this was in 2019, Vans came knocking at United Way's door when I was doing, volunteerism there.
Yeah.
And they were having their annual leadership conference in LA, the JW Marriott downtown. And they were going to bring 525 regional store managers from around the country and their whole Southern California crew of 75 to LA for 3 days of action. They wanted to devote a big chunk of one of the days to volunteerism and community impact.
Wow.
And so they saw Imagine LA, United Way, a lot of A's, a lot of LA's. United Way working in the homelessness space and really leading new initiatives there after some big legislation passed here. And knocked on the door and said, we want people to learn, we want people to take action, we want them to have fun, we want them to feel connected, all the things that we know about corporate partnerships, employee engagement, et cetera. So I put together an entire day of activities for them that included a panel with our sort of public policy advocacy arm, including lived experience speakers, to talk about the campaign, to talk about homelessness, to talk about what's happening in LA and the challenges and the solutions. We did my equity exercise with all 600 people in breakout rooms that ended up having 25 people per room, and we were in 8 rooms across 2 floors of the JW Marriott. And then sort of the pièce de résistance was them assembling 7,500 snack packs.
Oh my
They got loaded into boxes, into UPS vans, who came out and volunteered for us to bring 2,500 a piece out to 3 different boys and girls clubs around Southern California. And at the end of it, giant group photo with all 600 of these managers just like beaming.
That's amazing.
And the price tag on this activity was $85,000.
Wow.
And I spent about 20 grand on supplies.
Wow. But what about the impact? I mean, the impact of that just on every different level is amazing.
And this was in June. So this was leading into the summer months when those boys and girls clubs were really going to need those snack packs and be able to distribute them. And they were healthy too. We had fruit in them. We had, bottled water. We had some cookies or something.
Well, you've had I don't want to say you've had an amazing career. You're leading an amazing career. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing your career and just the metaphors that you used, and encouragement is amazing. If our viewers have any questions, we'll have them drop them in the comments, but we'll also have a slide at the end that has some of the links that you mentioned, and also the link to your website. And thank you so much for your time. Thanks,
Jennifer. I love that. I found you.
Yes,
I saw another spotlight. I saw another spotlight in the magazine. And I said, hey, I think I could add value. And I think really that's my, if there's sort of a rod going up and down me, it's that everyone has goals, everyone has interests, everyone has needs, everyone has passions. And if I can take a guess at what other people want, I mean, obviously ask and listen, but whether it's working with clients, whether it's working with partners, whether it's working with donors, I'm just here to say, hey, it sounds like this is important to you. I would love to help you get there. So I'm glad that I could help you get there.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jennifer.